Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Now some of my subscribers have requested that I should make a replica against d4. Well, the thing is, when your opponent plays d4, to make a replica, it's like a full-time job, because you can see by the arrows over here, white has so many options. Now the main moves from the black side is knight to f6 or the d5, but against each of them white has a plenty of choices. Now the main move and the most often move played is c4, but apart from c4 white has a few very good openings. For example, white can play over here bishop to g5, which is known as a Trompowsky attack. Also white can play bishop to f4, which is known as a London system. White can play knight to f3 and e3, which is known as a Cole system, and white can also play knight to c3 and bishop to g5, which is known as a Verosov attack. White can also play a quieter systems like knight to f3, g3 and c4, which is known as a Catalan variation. And there are plenty more. I haven't included the gambits and other systems. And prepare against each of the system, you require lots of time, and especially if you want to win in tournaments against these systems, then you need to study the variations and the sub variations. So all in all, in this busy life, if you don't have time to study against each of the system, what I have done in this video is I'm going to show you one of my own secret weapon which I occasionally used, especially in quick games, and it turns out very well for me. Now let me show you the exact piece layout of the black. So black can start either with the move c6 or the d6. So let's say here we start with the move c6 followed by the d6. Queen goes to the c7 square, and meantime when white plays knight to f3, we are going to pin that knight with bishop to g4. Then black can play knight to d7 and e5. Now these two moves can be alternate. So in some circumstances black can play e5 first followed by the knight to d7. Then the other knight goes to the f6 square and bishop goes to the e7 square. And meantime, depending on how white has responded, black can choose his plan. So for example, if white has gone on the king side, then if you want to play a very strong positional game, you can castle on the same side and then you can throw your queen side pawns up to the board. If the white has castle on the queen side, if you want to play safe, then this time you can go on the queen side and you can look forward for the central break. And in either cases, if you want to play an aggressive game, then you can do a opposite side castle and look forward for the opposite flank attack. So you can see it's a very versatile opening. Now every single opening has a pros and cons. For this opening you should know before you play it. Now the plus side is the black piece layout are very much fixed. That means you do not need to study opening theories and you can churn out these moves very quickly. The second good merit is you are avoiding all the big traps, and the main trappy lines exist in regular openings. You can strongly look forward for an equal middle game where the strong player will win. The downside is you giving white somewhat space in early stages, but nevertheless you will slowly hit back in the middle game. Now as usual, I'm going to show you some of my own game which will give you an idea how you can play for the win in different positions. So before we start, let me show you some of the traps exist in this opening. And the first trap which I want to show you happens in the Trompowsky attack. So after white start with the move d4, we respond with the c6, and it's a nature of Trompowsky player that he or she will play bishop to g5 against any black opening, and here we'll play a cunning move which is d6. Now as per the normal theory of the Trompowsky, the normal move over here is e3, but if your opponent is going to play e3 against this system, then this is the last time he's going to play, because this will simply lose a piece after queen check. And now you can see this pawn right now, it's stopping this bishop to come back, and just in the fourth move we can win the one piece of the white. So there is one trap exists, especially in bishop to g5 line. Against our structure, white has to play a very precise move. Even if he play one careless move, then he can lose the game very easily. So let me show you one of my quickest win from this opening. My opponent plays d4 and I played with c6, and he responded with a classical system by the white: e4, d6, and knight c3, queen c7, knight f3. And please remember, whenever the knight f3 occurs, it's time for the bishop to g4 move. He played h3 and I dropped my bishop back, and then he played bishop to c4. Now I continue with the normal piece development. So knight to d7, and after bishop to e3 I played e5. Here he responded with the g4, attacking my bishop. My bishop drops back to the g6, and then he played queen to d2. And first it looks very obvious, but in fact this is a disaster move, because after black's next move, which is knight to f6, you can see the pressure is building up on the e pawn. Now the most natural move is bishop to d3, but my opponent thought that the bishop is sitting ideally on this diagonal. So my opponent decided to move his queen again with queen to d3 to protect that pawn, but this leads to losing a piece. Can you find it? Yep, it's d5. Please note this right now e pawn is pinned, and if the bishop moves back, then black can simply grab this pawn and that will fork the knight and the queen. In the game my opponent captured this pawn, but after this following sequence you can see black emerge with a clear piece up, and at this point my opponent resigned. So that is one of the quick game which I have won, and that highlighted that your opponent has to play a very precise moves. Now let me show you some of the serious games in this line. In one of my game, when I played bishop to g4, my opponent responded with this move, which is bishop to e2. Again the normal piece development from the black, so line is very natural, and here my opponent grabbed the more space in the center, so he played d5, and there is no need to panic at this point, so you just need to carry out your normal piece development. So I played knight to f6, and then the usual line goes like this. So he castled bishop to e7, and now he played h3, and my bishop dropped back to the h4. And after some thinking, my opponent decided here to capture my c pawn, and his idea is to pressurize my backward pawns on d and c. So next few moves are very logical. So he played queen to d2. Planning is very simple. Rook wants to come on the d file where it can pressurize more to that pawn. Anyways, I carried out the normal piece development. So I first of all played rook to b8, attacking the backward pawn, and after he defended, I castled on the king side, and after the normal move of the white, which is rook to d1, I played rook f to d8, and then he played a4, gaining more space on the queen side, and here I played knight to f8. So planning is very simple. I'm just right now waiting for the right move. So I played my knight, which was not sitting ideally on d7, so I want to reroute that knight from f8 to e6, where it can look forward for the right movement to jump on either on d4 or the f5. My opponent played knight to h2. Probably he wants to exchange my bishop, but I simply drop my bishop back to g6. My two pieces are attacking the pawn. Here my opponent made the first small error, and he played bishop to d3, and very natural is that allow me to break through in the center with this move, which is d5. More often one mistake will follow with the another one. So here my opponent captured the pawn, and normal move is recapturing the pawn, but instead of that there is a one stronger move over here, which is bishop to b4, pinning the knight. Now the ideal move should be queen goes back to e1 and then again defend the knight with bishop to d2, but my opponent completely missed my next move, and he thought that he will stop my queen coming into the picture by playing this move, which is d6. So now you can see right now my queen cannot have access of this file, but he completely overlooked this move, which is queen to e5, and now there is no way white can defend that knight. Further 3 or 4 moves has been played. White take the bishop, I recapture with the knight, and after queen to d3, bishop captures knight. The game didn't last long. So this kind of errors can be occurred if your opponent does not play carefully, and as a strong middle game player you can look forward for a very good middle game. So far we were dealing with d4 e4. Now we are going to see one of my own game which happens in d4 c4. So here my opponent responded with c4, and I'm going through the moves very quickly. You can see it's our normal piece development, except there is one exception over here. White hasn't developed the knight over here. In this kind of scenarios, what you are going to do is you will change your move order slightly. So instead of bishop to g4 right now, we are going to wait for one move. So we are going to play knight to f6, and here my opponent played knight to f3, and then whenever the knight appears, it's time to pin the knight, and again the usual line continues. I can play bishop to e7, but instead of that I prefer that bishop has a more suitable square, c5. So I decided to play bishop to c5, and my opponent defended the bishop with queen to d2. And after some thinking, I decided to castle long. The simple reason is the rook has been arrived at the open file where it can look forward for a discover attack to the queen, and the game goes on like this. So my opponent captured the bishop and recapture with the knight. Few moves are like this. And here, after some thinking, I grab that pawn. Sometimes people get afraid that you should not capture the pawn if you are specially done the opposite side castle. But here I don't see any tactics for the white. So I decided to grab the free lolly, and white responded with, of course, rook f to b1, and then I responded with knight to f4, and here he played this move, which is attacking my queen. So queen drop backs to c5, and here my opponent played knight to a4, which is outright mistake, because black can simply reply with this move, which is queen to f2. And now you can see the mate has been threatened. The only way to defend is bishop to d3, but after a very simple queen cross queen, bishop takes queen, and rook to d2, black has a tremendous initiative, and in fact I won the game. Now before concluding my video, I like to show you the most interesting game which I have played against the Fritz 12 with this system, and to my surprise I found out that even Fritz cannot exploit this opening, at least for 15 moves. Moves are like this. So Fritz started with the move d4, and I started with our normal system, and here he played knight to c3, nevertheless queen to c7, and it was a transposition to the classical opening of the white. And here of course bishop to g4, Fritz responded with h3, the bishop drops back, and then he played bishop to e2, I played knight to d7, and here he played a3. Nevertheless, it's time for the e5, and here bishop e3, then knight to f6, and then Fritz played knight to h4, so attacking my bishop. If I wish I can exchange that bishop, but I decided to protect my bishop, so I played bishop to g6, and here Fritz captured my bishop, and I captured with the h pawn. So at least that gave me somewhat half open h file. Here the usual line continues with queen to d2, bishop to e7, and Fritz castle on the king side. Please note, as I mentioned in my earlier stage, that it's very important that if you want to play a positional game, then you should throw your queen side pawn, and this is a time to grab some space on the queen side. So I played a5, and Fritz responded with rook f to d1, and then I simply castle on the king side, and then he played this move, which is rook goes back to e1, and then I played b4. So you can see it's a very easy plan to remember. All you need to do is push this guys up to the board. Fritz immediately stopped my queen side advancement with this move, which is b4, and then I played this move, which is d5, so attacking the center. Right now you can see the tension has been built up in the center, and here Fritz played d cross e5, and after some calculation I have gone through this sequence. So a cross b4, attacking the knight. So Fritz responded with a cross b4, and then I grabbed that pawn, so knight cross e5, and after queen to d4 I put my knight on a wonderful square, which is knight to c4, which has a merit of attacking that pawn. And here Fritz responded with e cross d4. I first of all grabbed the bishop pair, so knight cross e3, and after f cross e3 I first of all captured the rook, and after Fritz recaptured I played knight cross d4, and after knight cross d4, c cross d4, Fritz played the first attacking move after the opening, which is rook to a7, and I simply put my queen on d6, bishop to f3, and I played first of all bishop to f6, gaining time on the queen, and after queen drop backs to the d2 I played d4. And if somehow I can manage to exchange these pieces, then we have an opposite color bishop, and that leads to the drawish game, and that exactly happened in the game. So I finally managed to draw the game, but I have to admit that I have done few takebacks, so that is but obvious because it's mighty Fritz. So you can see by playing this way, even Fritz cannot exploit this opening immediately. I hope you enjoy and learn this wonderful system against the d4. Please try out in your game, and you'll slowly and gradually familiar with the different kind of situation. And all I can say is it's a one kind of transposition to the middle game where the stronger player will win the game. Please feel free to comment on my video, and I'll meet you soon. Bye.